and welcome to Our People, the podcast where we give space for Holdeman Stories. We focus on hope, healing, and inspiration. Connection, consciousness, and love are the driving motivations for this project. Remember to have grace for those who have chosen to speak out and share their experience. Please enjoy the story you will hear today.
Good morning and welcome to Our People's podcast. Today I am your host Amanda and I'm joined by Waylon, and we have Justin Hunt on for our guest. So Justin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, Amanda.
Well, you just wanted to start telling us about your story?
Yeah, I suppose I could. I'll try to make it as brief as possible. I tend to have two modes of operation. Either I say very, very little, or I start talking and don't stop for about 3 to 4 hours, especially when it comes to my life, to my story, because I get sidetracked easily. Born in 1990 to St. Mary's, Ontario. It was shortly after I was born that my parents decided to split ways. Not sure that agreement was unanimously agreed on by both sides, but it did come about that way regardless. And so my mother decided she was joining the Holdeman Church in St. Mary's, Southern Ontario there, which may or may not have led to the separation, the divorce, the split. Not entirely certain of the details on that. I was pretty young back then, youngest of 5 kids, like I was saying. And so my mother ended up raising 5 kids by herself in St. Mary's through the 90s with everything that brought. You know, I have pretty good recollections back to a fairly young age, and mostly what I can remember is my mother working a lot of jobs, trying her best to make ends meet in any way she could, keeping us clothed and fed, housed, whatever it took, doing whatever it took to just keep us alive, really. And I will say this, the church provided a tremendous amount of help through that time. I really don't know where we would have been or what would have happened to us if it had not been for the church's help. And I will freely admit that, you know, for all of the faults that the church has and the terrible things that have happened within its confines, they did step up and help us when we were not doing very well. You know, I started going to school. I think I was 6 years old, first grade. Right out the gate, you know, it was survival for me. A lot of survival. Had very few friends, even in first grade on up. I was a bit of an outsider. It felt like, to me at least. You know, I had a unique or different last name. I didn't have cousins going 3 to 4 layers deep all around me. I didn't have family gatherings every other weekend. And for the most part, it felt like I was nothing but a burden to my actual family, let alone the larger community I fit into. So, you know, it wasn't an overly enjoyable part of my life, just trying to figure all that out, navigate it. I am stubborn, I guess. So if there was one thing that I was going to keep doing was just keep going as best as possible. The story didn't change much as I progressed through the school years. Got into the upper grades, got a bit older, figured that maybe that would kind of help with the acceptance or help with having friends. You know, maybe then I would fit in finally. Maybe then I would find a group. But no, not really. It never did happen, really, or so it felt like to me at the time. And I know I give a lot of disclaimers. I do apologize. It is a habit that has been ingrained into me. I say things like, as it appeared to me, or, you know, from my perspective, because, yeah, there's been a lot of times.
That's very good. Because even people that were raised in the same family, they don't have the same perspective of every situation. So, absolutely.
Yeah. And, well, thank you. Actually, I appreciate you understanding that. It helps a lot. So as I was getting up in the upper grades, you know, the pressures of the church started to come into play. You need to have a conversion experience. have a born again experience, get baptized, join the church. And that was kind of the next big hurdle. I thought maybe this would fix my problems. Maybe this would fix my acceptance problem if I was just a member of the church. And so I pursued that with a very single-minded focus for years. I was raised in a Mennonite system. They excel at teaching people how to wallow in self-guilt and shame and all of that fun stuff. I was no exception. I knew how to lay it on. I knew the joys of self-loathing and shame and hatred of myself. And it only intensified because now, turns out, not only did the people at school not like me and think that I was a moron, turns out God thought I was a moron as well. So it was an interesting point in my life. Did not get much sleep for a very long time, just waking up terrified because obviously I'm going to hell. Obviously, I might die in my sleep. Like all the irrational fears that come with the entire culture and belief system, just wow, so powerful and so constant. It was a hell of a burden to carry for a 10-year-old kid. But finally, I think I was probably 12 years old. I finally had that experience. They talk about their conversion experience, and sure enough, I was able to convince the ministers that it was real. I convinced myself that it was real, and I finally, they said, okay, we accept this. This is the real deal. But you're an angry person. You're a very angry person. We can't let you join. You need to prove yourself. That the anger. Oh, I was an angry, violent person when I was a kid. I'd hit people with hockey sticks and baseball bats, beat the ever living shit out of them. Growing up in the home I grew up in, it was chaotic. It was angry. People were angry in my family. Violence was kind of the default mode of conflict resolution. Even if there wasn't a conflict, you could always make a conflict and then, solve it with violence. I learned that from a very young age. And so all through my younger years in school, there was a reason people didn't like me, I'm assuming, because I was liable to tell you good morning or hit you with a hockey stick over the head. I don't know. I wasn't a very nice person. I was a kid. I don't know. So anyways, 12 years old, they're like, yeah, you've had a conversion experience, but you need to prove yourself. You need to show us that the anger has been taken care of. And, interestingly enough, that there was a turning point in that time of my life, because prior to that, like, it took very, very little to set me off, make me extremely angry, violent, you name it. And after whatever experience I had, maybe it was the ministers telling me that I needed to get it under control. I don't know, but I found the strength to bottle it up and push it down and completely suppress that part of me. Impressive. I went from, pretty violent to very calm. Just, it took a lot to get a rise out of me. And that has stayed that way largely throughout my entire life since that point, for better or for worse. I say largely because in the last couple of years, I found out that the anger issue wasn't dealt with. It was just suppressed, and it was just bottling up and, still sitting down there. So that was an interesting experience, but I can get to that later. But yeah, so 12, 13 years old, I think I waited a year and they finally baptized me, and great, I'm a member. I've been baptized, I've been accepted. And you know, the interesting part about all that too is I explain this from the perspective of having been gone, having left the church for damn near a decade now. But at that point in my life, and for a lot of my life, up until I was in my late teens, early 20s, I believed in the church. Like, I believed so deeply in everything that they stood for. I don't know how to explain that accurately, but yeah, I was a believer, and there was nothing that could shake my faith. You know, if there was a problem, I was the problem. There was nothing that the church could do that was wrong, and I was the problem, right? So that was an interesting dynamic to carry along with all this, because there was no ability. I had no ability to look at myself and say, I need to work on this part of me or this part of me. And this part of me that's being projected onto me from the church is something that's not my weight to carry. No. If they said it, I believed it. And so I was the problem, always. Didn't matter what situation. Yeah. Carry that along with a natural inclination towards depression, self-loathing, you know, all of those fairly negative energies. It was kind of a recipe for disaster. But meanwhile, I'm still hoping that maybe being accepted, maybe being in the church is going to help the people accept me, help the youth group accept me, help my friends at school accept me. And no, turns out that didn't help either. The bullying, the mocking, it was incessant. The only difference was now I didn't defend myself. I just took it. It's like, whatever. And that carried on throughout the remainder of my time in school. And so it was sometime in the 9th grade, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. It had to have been 9th grade. It was an interesting point, because I was at school, random day. I have no idea what day it was. All I remember is I reached a breaking point. Random day. It was probably fall or early winter, and I reached a breaking point. And I made up my mind that when I got home that day after school, I was going to kill myself. It was kind of interesting because I had often considered it up to that point. It annoys me still that the emotion comes up. I don't know why it annoys me, but yeah.
I think it would be a very bad sign if the emotion didn't still come up on some things. You can look at them and you can see what you have learned from them. But if there's still healing to be done, then absolutely, though, you're still going to have emotions over them. And sometimes you'll still have emotions over the strange things years later. And I don't think this is a strange thing, because talking about unaliving yourself, that's a big decision. I mean, and things had to have been pretty messed up for you and as a 9th grader to come to that decision. I think you have every right to still have emotions regarding this. And it's okay. Waylon and I are perfectly comfortable with emotion and tears, so don't mind us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I think the part that annoys me is that, well, it's vulnerability. Emotion is vulnerability. And that is something I have struggled with a lot in my life, because vulnerability has always been, well, not all, yeah, it's a weakness. It's a weakness when it comes to people who are trying to control you or modify your behavior to some extent. And so, I, yeah, I've,
You probably learned at a very young age that vulnerability was a weakness to be exploited by others.
yes,
Okay.
100%.
Well,
And
I would highly, if you haven't done inner child work, you might want to do that because you can go back now as an adult and you can tell that ninth grader that he is safe. And I absolutely love inner child work. So if you want to take some of those journeys, hit me up later.
I've, I've, I've done a little bit. I have done some, and eh, over, overwhelmingly, well, it's fairly overpowering, to put it mildly. There's a lot that comes out. There's a lot that comes out when I address my inner child, as you can imagine. Possibly, there's a lot of years of some fairly pent up rage and hatred and darkness back there that can get overwhelming. But anyhow,
I mean,
so
but your buddy Cam, this would be a great, conversation with Cam and a little of this.
oh yes, and he and I have had many of these conversations over the years. He is, man. I have a tremendous amount of love and respect for that man. I've told him things that I probably haven't told any other person, and I suspect possibly likewise. Possibly, we've had some good conversations, but yeah, ninth grade just snapped, broke. Decided I didn't want to do it anymore. The interesting part about it was the I should say the part that intrigues me the most, looking back at that point, was there had been moments I'd considered that before then, and it was always no, no, like it's not the right approach, it's not the right path. Like I really don't want to take that road. I have no idea what happened that day that caused me to reach that point. But all I know is that the sense of absolute peace was overwhelming. It was it was incredible. Just complete acceptance and equanimity of that decision. And it yeah, I'm not going to say it was a good day because I don't know. I have no idea if the day was good or terrible. All I know is that it was just complete. I was at peace with it. And so that afternoon it was a little interesting. It got interesting because my mother came to pick me up. She was off work early. She came to pick me up from school. She had to go to Stratford to go buy some groceries. So like, yeah, that's fine. I don't really care. So I rode along and took her a couple of hours. On our way back home, she stopped in at the shop where my brother was working, and it was later in the evening, dark out, probably 6:30, 7 o'clock. I don't know what time it was, but she wanted to stop in there and just talk to him before she went home. And so we walked into the office of the shop, and my brother was the only one there. It was already closed up for the day, and the phone was ringing, which odd, sure, out of the ordinary or really bizarre, probably not. My brother answered it because he was the only one there, so we answered the phone, and he immediately handed the phone to me, told me it was for me, and handed the phone to me. And it was a man from the congregation And he just laughed. He's like, man, you're a really hard one to get a hold of. I've been trying to track you down all afternoon. Haven't been able to reach you at home. Been trying every place I can think of to get a hold of you. Because he's like, let me explain. He's like, we just bought a house. We just closed on a house that needs to be like extensive renovations. And, we're wondering if you'd be willing to help us out, like just after school on the weekends. And he's like, you can come on down right now. We have supper ready. And like, you can just live with us for the rest of the year, like the rest of the winter. I was like, oh, well, I guess, yeah. They, yeah, this family, they had a number of kids. Their two oldest boys were very similar in age to myself, and they were probably the closest thing I had to friends, the closest people I had to friends in my life at that point. Though, at that point, it seemed like even that was kind of a tenuous description. I hesitated to call anybody a friend because they could just turn on you in the blink of an eye. But anyways, I did like them. I got along with them. I knew that. And so I ended up, like, my mother ended up taking me over to their place that evening. I never did make it home. I never did make it home from school. That was the first experience of, you might say, out of their ordinary forces being applied that altered me from extremely life-altering choices that would not have been good. And there have been a number of them throughout my life, which is also why Cam has the ability to say I like the out of the ordinary, the paranormal, the extra normal, so to speak, is because the things that I've experienced like that right there, I don't believe in coincidence. I don't believe that things happen for random reasons that we cannot understand. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't necessarily understand the reasons they happen, but I do believe that there is generally a reason behind the things that happen, even if I'm unable to see them. And so, I know I get emotional. I'm not an emotionless person. It's just that I try to pass myself off as an emotionless person because it seems to work easier for the most part in my line of work, in the place where I came from, and yeah, it's one of those defense mechanisms, you might say. So, yeah. Back to the story, though. Ended up spending a fairly large chunk of the remainder of that year, 14, 15 years old, and went through the winter helping remodel the house. Got to be very, very close with that entire family. And if any member of that family listens to this, they'll know exactly who they are. I'm not going to say names, but yeah, I suspect that I largely owe my life today to their actions, to the compassion they had for a very hurting person at that point. But the house project moved along, got finished. I graduated ninth grade, and again, people listening to this, if they know anything about it, they may sit there and be like, "Oh, the dates are wrong." I don't know. Honestly, there are so many pivotal moments like this from points in my childhood and early teenage years that I can't put the dates on anymore. It's just it it seemed to run together. It seemed to really, really run together, and the highlights or the big points, they stood out. I could remember those, but there's vast portions of my memory from my childhood and even into my teenage years that are just complete blanks. I don't know why that is. I've done some regression therapy. I've done hypnotherapy. I have tried to figure out what those blank spots are in my memories, and without fail, the answer that I've gotten back is that I don't need to know the answers at this point. I have no idea what's down there, and it's probably nothing. I hope it's just a field of green grass and flowers, because God knows I don't need any more cesspools or you know, sinkholes like I have elsewhere. So, anyways, yeah, graduated ninth grade though, 15 years old, Southern Ontario. That was in 2006. Yeah, because I turned 16 in September of that year, shortly after I moved to Alberta. But 15 years old, they're like, you graduated ninth grade. What you gonna do with your life now? Like, I have no idea. You know, most of my friends, they had dads that they went to work for. They had family businesses, or they had uncles or family, extended family that they went to work for. I had nothing. I had no one. My family was dirt poor. Two of my brothers had already moved to northern Alberta because they went there for work. I had a brother in Africa. And, well, my sister, yeah, she wasn't at home. I had nothing. I had no one to turn to for work or really even any guidance. My father was completely absent. You know, like it was shortly after my grandfather died in 19 mid to late 1990s that he just stopped coming around. You know, he'd show up on weekends or here and there, and then one day he was sorry, and I do get sidetracked, I realize. Anyways, he had taken us out for the day on a Saturday, driving us back to the house. Some argument broke out like it often did, or something happened. Everybody got angry. He got angry. He dropped us off a mile from the house, told us to walk home, and I never saw him again. Ever. So, you know, I'm now 15 years old. I have no father figure. I have no mentor trying to be like, here, do this or go here. I'm just, my mom's still working full time, trying to pay the rent and pay the bills. I got nothing. So I sat at home for like a month and a half, did nothing. And yeah, random Sunday in July, we'd gone to Southern Ontario, Leamington, Ontario for Sunday morning service. I don't know why Mom decided to go there, but she wanted to go to Leamington, so we went to Leamington. Ended up having dinner with some people we knew down there. You know, the Sunday afternoon, Sunday meal get together, and we some guy asked me, he's like, "What are you going to do with your life now that you're graduated ninth grade?" I'm like, "I don't know. I really don't know. I have no idea what I can do. There's no work. Like, people that are much older than I am are struggling to find work right now. The economy is absolutely tanked. Like, and even if I did find a job, like, maybe I'd be looking at $5 an hour if I was lucky. which honestly, $5 an hour at 15 years old, I was like, that'd be pretty good. I'd be okay with that. I just kind of half joked. I was like, I'm kind of thinking of just moving to Alberta because it seems like there's work out there. He's like, oh yeah, no, I've heard there's work out there. And well, that got me thinking for the rest of the day. And Monday morning, I was like, honestly, why? I have a phone. I have a phone book. I have phone numbers. Why wouldn't I? So I called up to some random place in Crooked Creek. I was like, I'm looking for work. You got work? It's like, if you're serious about work, call this number. Gave me a phone number. I called it. Hey, I'm looking for work. He's like, when can you be here? I'm like, what? He's like, yes, we need workers. When can you be here? I'm like, sir, I'm a 15-year-old Mennonite kid from Southern Ontario. I don't know. I didn't expect this. He's like, I don't care. I don't care what age you are. I don't care who you are. We'll hire you right now. Like, when can you be here? We'll pay you $15.50 an hour. And I'm like, what? I'm like, oh my God. Okay. This just got real. So I told him, I was like, I need to arrange. I need to figure some stuff out. I'll call you right back. So I started making phone calls and somehow got permission to fly halfway across the country and start welding at a fabrication shop in the northern Canadian oil fields at 15 years old. Yeah, bizarre. And so Sunday, the following Sunday, a week later, I flew out. And my brother picked me up from the airport in Edmonton, drove me up to Crooked Creek, and Monday morning, I was at work at a welding shop. I was like, okay, wow, my life changed dramatically, very, very, like, rapidly.
So who did you move in with? Your brother?
So, yep, my brothers had a house rented in Crooked Creek, and I just moved in with them.
That's awesome. So both of your brothers.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
And yeah, it worked. It worked. It gave me something to do. It gave me a place to stay, and I was.
And a great skill.
It wasn't. Yeah, definitely a lot of opportunities with that career path, which it's kind of. I wouldn't. No, I'm by no means a welder, but it's definitely played a role into getting to where I'm at today to a large degree, right? But God, I still look back 15 years old. Like, I look at 15-year-olds today and I'm like, I cannot imagine somebody looked at me at 15 years old and said, this is a good idea to send this kid halfway across the country, move in with his two adult brothers, and go work at a welding shop, a fabrication shop. But I did it. It worked. It was a different time back in 2006. Apparently, child labor laws weren't quite as strict as they are now. Thank God for that, because, I didn't know what else I was going to do with my life. So, yeah, I started attending church in Crooked Creek and quickly made a bunch of friends. The youth group accepted me. They actually seemed to like me, which was a little odd to me. I didn't know how to deal with that. It was fascinating. But oh God, I'm losing my train of mind. I'm so sorry. There's things going on outside the window, and I should not have looked at the window. The squirrel brain was getting into full swing there. So, turned 16 that fall. The company I went to work for, it was definitely on the downward spiral. It had just gotten bought out. There was an acquisition. A big company, a big firm came in, bought a family-owned company pretty much to buy out the competition. They didn't really care if it lived or died. It died. It was dying. I saw the writing on the wall. I jumped ship. And so for the remainder of 2006, I worked at that fab shop for a couple of months, and I jumped from there to another fab welding shop, and I worked there for a couple of months. Left there, went to another welding shop, worked there for a few months. That took me into early winter, or like early in the year in 2007. And I, yeah, somewhere's in there, I bought a truck. I bought like little regular cab short bed Chevy. It was great. I loved it. And then the welding kind of started to dry up. The oil field was kind of starting to slow down a little bit. It was starting to feel the precursors to the whole '08 crisis. Maybe I just sucked at my job, but I don't know. It's hard to say looking back now, but regardless, the welding thing kind of came to an end. The contracts dried up, and I went to work for a auto body shop. So I went to work at an auto body shop that was owned by one of the members there in Cougar Creek. Great guy. Really enjoyed it. Enjoyed the work tremendously. You know, through all this time, I'd gone from, still a member, still attending church, and I had gone from this insecure, by my own perspective. I've heard other people say differently, but we won't go there right now. I was a very, very shy kid in St. Mary's that wore nothing but hand-me-downs and rather worn-out clothes. I had a comb-over of all comb-overs, slicked down. It was quite the look. And in a matter of weeks of moving into Curry Creek and making my new friends at church and kind of learning where I fit in, I changed. I changed dramatically. Gone was a comb over. I spent my entire first check. It was 2 weeks of work. I had like over $1,000 from 2 weeks of work. It was the most money I'd ever seen in my life. I'm still 15 years old. I went and spent $1,000 on brand new clothes. And I was there to live it up, to live life, and to enjoy myself, to finally enjoy my youth like I had never had an opportunity before then. And through it all, I still believed in the church with all of my heart, soul, and mind. It was who I was to my core. But, if my friends were listening to music in the car on the way to work, on the way to town on the weekend, it wasn't me that turned it on. So, I could kind of justify it to some extent, right? All the little things. I'd watch a few movies here and there, and, just normal teenage activities. Thought I was doing pretty good. Knew that there was some areas in my life that the church didn't like, but they didn't make a big deal of it for the most part. Bought a truck, and working at the auto body shop, life was good. Few odds and ends that, the church I knew didn't like. They would have conversations, never a really big deal, so on and so forth. That all kind of changed in the winter of '08. I'm pretty sure we'd had a little bit of backstory to fill in the parts to make sense for the part that's coming. We'd had a teacher come into Cougar Creek, incredible person. Everybody loved her. And I was pretty good friends with her. Through it, got to know her sister. They were from Carrot River, Saskatchewan. She taught for a couple of terms. And it was in the winter of 2008. She and her sister both died in a terrible car wreck, and a horrific car wreck. So that shook the community up. That shook the youth group up tremendously, because we'd all been very close with her. And Curry Creek kind of showed up in force at the funeral in Carrot River, myself included. I went up there with three of my friends. We drove up, and my friends were like, "Oh, we're gonna watch them. We're gonna stop at the movie rental place and pick up a bunch of DVDs. We're gonna watch some movies on the way." Okay, cool. That's fine. I don't really care. Not really in the mood to watch movies, but that's fine. I'm not too worried about it. So we went to the funeral, came back home, life carried on. Revivals came around, and like I was saying, their deaths had shook the community up. It kind of shook me up. Somewhat resurfaced those old fears of, if I die today, where am I going to go tomorrow? So sort of thing, right? And so I had spent a fair bit of time and effort cleaning my act up. I had quit listening to music. I had quit watching movies. I had overall brought my life back into line with what I knew the church required and wanted. So revivals come around. They call me in for the perfunctory visit. It was one and done, 15 minutes, quick and easy. They were happy. Life was good. Go home. A couple days later, I get a phone call. They want to have another meeting. I'm like, okay, that's odd, but sure. I walk in to the meeting, and they'd showed up in force. All of the visiting staff, all of the home staff. Curry Creek was a big congregation. They had a fair number of ministers and deacons. I think there was like 9 ministers and deacons in this meeting with me. So when I walked in, it was like, okay, this is a little odd. Not sure what's going on, but again, I have nothing to hide. I'm not trying to hide anything. There's nothing I can think of that's of any concern. And the meeting started out pretty normal. And then one of the old guys, he was an old minister, he was visiting for revivals. He's like, so we've been hearing that you watch movies. Well, yeah, I had been. I stopped. I cut that out. I cleaned up my act. I was honest about all of that. They're like, so what kind of movies have you been watching? Pretty generic, I thought. Just, I tried to explain a little bit. Some comedy movies, some action movies. They're like, so were any of these movies X-rated? I was like, no. I think there may have been an R-rated movie in there at some point, but he's like, so X-rated? No X-rated. I don't even know what that is, quite honestly. R-rated, so X-rated. Like, this went back and forth just bizarrely for a few minutes. Me reiterating that it was R-rated, him saying, so X-rated. No. Finally, one of the home staff kind of like cleared his throat, leaned in. He's like, so when you watch these R-rated movies, do your feelings become apparent? I'm like, what? Oh yeah, no, it gets worse. It gets so much worse for a few minutes. I'm so sorry. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I don't understand the question. He's like, so.
Do you have a banana in your pocket? That is what we're asking.
Oh no, worse than that. He's like, so when you watch these R-rated movies with your friends, do you masturbate? I was like, what? No, what? No. And then they're like, so we've been hearing you've been going to bars and drinking. I'm like, no. I have been in a bar one time, and I don't even know how I got in there. I'm 16, 17 years old. Like, I'm not even allowed in the bars. I don't even know how I got in that one time. He's like, oh, so you have been. So have you been to like the strip clubs? Like, what? Where is this coming from? Like, no, absolutely not. Again, I'm 17 years old. Like, what do you think? And then one of the other home ministers, oh God, he's like, so do you know what buggery is? I'm like, are you asking if I've had sex with animals? No, absolutely not. it sounds funny. It sounds bizarre, but in the place that I was at, like up to that point, I had believed so completely in the church.
This was Crooked Creek, right?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
well then, hello. Now we know why they were asking you this stuff.
Come to find out in later years that they had reasons for asking those questions, and they themselves may have been part of the reason. I'm not here to make judgments or to say yes or no on that, but obviously, as I got older and more information came out about Crooked Creek, I realized that the questions were asked because of their own experiences and what they had either dealt with or done themselves. Again, not my place to make accusations because I don't know, but it shook me to my core, like through and through. Up to that point, I had believed wholeheartedly that the ministers and the staff had my best interest in mind, that the church was paramount to God. I dug into that. Like in that meeting, I asked some questions, albeit 17-year-old questions with very little experience in dealing with this sort of thing. Well, I came to find out later that there had been rumors going around about me that I was watching pornography with my friends on the trip up to the funeral. I had been driving. My friends had been in the backseat of the truck with the laptop set up on the console, and they had been watching some movie, and somebody behind us, had seen through, I do not know how they derived the information that they spread, albeit gossip being what it is, it rarely ever needs a concrete accusation or a concrete form of evidence to make up some pretty wild claims. But the rumor was that I'd been watching pornography with my friends on the way to Tanis's funeral. It's just like, that is wild. But needless to say, that was the beginning of the end. It really made me question a lot of things that I had never questioned before. Made me ask questions about ideas and beliefs that I had held without question that I did not believe could be questioned. Right. Hell, I think it was less than a week later, I moved out of Crooked Creek. I was 17. I had a truck of my own. I was fairly independent, and work being what it was with the '08 crisis, I really wasn't tied down to one job. I had just been kind of taking odd jobs, so to speak, for a number of months. And I decided that was probably my time to get out. And so I moved. A couple days later, made it very clear. I called one of the staff members and told him, I was like, look, I'm out. I'm leaving. I'm moving away. And this is the reason I'm moving away. Like, I will not. Like, that was bizarre, that line of questioning. The accusations, the fact that it came off of nothing but gossip. Ridiculous. I have zero interest in being part of that. And so I moved to Bow Island, southern Alberta. Lived there for a month or two. And then my work down there kind of came to an end. The job that I was doing for a friend of mine kind of came to an end. A friend of mine from Peace River called, from Crooked Creek, but he was living and building a house up in Peace River. So I moved to Peace River, helped them build a house for a couple of months. And that whole situation was very unique in and of itself. A couple months in, I realized that probably didn't want to hang around there much, just with some of the stuff that was going down, made it all very, very awkward and weird, and I didn't really want to deal with it. So I was like, all right, it's time to go. Just so happened another good friend of mine called me up one day. He's like, hey, I know you probably aren't too set on wherever you're at right now, just based off your history. Got a job down here in Rimbey, close to Red Deer. that I think you might enjoy. I'm like, say no more. When do you want me? I'll be there. And so, matter of a couple days later, I packed up all my stuff, which at that time I had a firm belief that if it couldn't fit in a suitcase, I didn't need it. So I had one suitcase and I threw it in my truck and drove to Rimbey, central Alberta, and started working, doing more. It was construction and roofing and just some stuff like that. Fun job. I enjoyed it. I was working with a really good friend of mine. Great times. Liked the congregation, liked the people, fit in well, it seemed. Ended up staying there for a couple of years. And that was, up to that point, I had made decent money, found a job in Rimbey later on that year that took my income to levels that blew me away. I was 18 by then, and I took a truck driving job that was paying close to $100,000 a year. 18 years old, $100,000 a year. Man, I had it made. Like it was a small congregation. They didn't even have a minister. They had one deacon who was unique, to put it mildly, but he wasn't about to come at me sideways about baseless accusations. Hell, he'd barely come at me face to face about very real accusations, which I had a fair amount by that point. I was living life how I wanted.
Just because of his personality, is that why?
Okay. Yes, very much so.
Very timid, I take it.
You could say that, yes. It was funny because we had church, they had a church and went to church every Sunday. He being the only minister or the only staff member, so to speak. It was great. Church rarely ever went past 11:30. He'd get up, talk for 5 to 10 minutes. There was a phrase he'd always use that made me laugh. It was a standing joke. What are we going to do with what we've heard today? Well, we didn't hear much, so probably not very much. But hey, happy you asked. Every Sunday, right? It was funny. That was his go-to. What are we going to do with what we've heard today? But that's kind of beside the point. During that time, I was still committed to the church, but I definitely wasn't as committed anymore. I'd go out and I'd have a couple drinks with my friend, and yeah, life was pretty good overall. I had a girlfriend. There was a girl in Rimbey that I really liked. She liked me back. I bought a new truck for me. It was a really nice truck, making a lot of money. What was there to complain about? What was there not to enjoy? And so, life carried on. I was driving truck, pushing myself way too hard because I really liked money. And the more I worked, the more money I made, and that was great. Well, what goes up must come down, I suppose. And after about a year to a year and a half of pushing myself to some fairly extreme levels, working some extremely long hours, I guess I must have been completely burnt out, because in the space of a month, I got into a wreck with the truck that I was driving. I had a fender bender with my truck, and then I totaled my truck. I got into a fairly bad wreck, totaled my truck, and it seemed to be the tipping point. My life started to unravel a little bit, or a large bit. At that point, the relationship that I had was going a bit further than it should. I knew that, but there again, I wasn't really willing to look at it too closely or to deal with it. I also, in that time, went to boys' class down in Texas. Had a great time. The minister that was leading the boys' class was an interesting one. He somehow figured out real quick that I was pretty much full of bullshit, just to put it bluntly. And he zeroed in on that one really quickly. Came down to he made the judgment call that he was going to let me finish class. He was not going to push it any further. He wasn't going to push for me to get expelled. But that I really, really needed to take a close look at my life. Yeah, no, that's fair. I can do that. So went back home at the boys' class, and yeah, things kind of took a sideways turn almost immediately after I got back from class. I don't even know how to explain all that part, but I won't even try. Aside from, yeah, just went sideways. It unraveled very rapidly. My truck was totaled, and I was absolutely tired of my job. Come to find out that money alone does not really provide a lot of motivation or staying power. And so I quit. I had bought another truck by then, though. And so I moved back to Grand Prairie, the city to the west of Curry Creek. My brother had moved up there. He'd gotten married. He had moved up. He had opened up a sign shop. And he asked me if I wanted to help him run it. Sure. That sounds exciting. That sounds fun. So I moved up. I was living in Curry Creek, attending church in Curry Creek, technically, on occasion. And I was working in Grand Prairie. It was a matter of weeks after that. Word got out about the relationship that I'd had in Rimby, and they expelled me, finally. And so I was expelled. I had started smoking, I was drinking heavily, and I just didn't really care much. You know, I knew that I had dealt with whatever situation I got expelled for. I was very clear about that. It was done. I had repented. God, even. Yeah. I had made my amends. I had done my penance. I had repented. I had moved on. And they still expelled me. I was still smoking, but drinking, but you know, that part really didn't bother me that much anymore. And so I just kind of floated along for about 8 months there. They would not reaccept me because I was adamant that there was not going to be any new repentance experience that I was going to bring to the table. They could take it or leave it. And they mostly wanted to leave it. So every couple of months or every couple of weeks, they'd call me in for another meeting and ask me, how's it going, Justin? It's going great. Good. So how are you doing, though? Same as last time. Oh, okay. Well, you know, we just don't see our way to reaccept you at this time. That's fine. Don't really care. I know where I stand with God. I know where I stand. Your acceptance of that means very little to me. They must have seen the writing on the wall that if they did not act, that I wasn't going to come back. So finally, they're like, "All right." I went in for a meeting one evening, and it was funny because the only thing I changed, like I'd had a meeting less than a week prior. They were getting pretty active. It was revival time, and they seemingly were getting a little motivated to bring me back to the fold. So I showed up to the meeting in slacks and a button-down shirt. That was the only thing I changed. Prior to that, I'd showed up in t-shirts and whatever jeans I could find. And they commented on that a couple times, that they didn't like that much. They didn't like a lot about who I was at that point. In fact, they mentioned one time, they're like, Justin, we noticed that your cuffs were unbuttoned in church. And we noticed that. And it's a sign, like we felt that it was a sign of your commitment to the church, to God. Yeah. Well, my arms are long. I told them, my arms are long. Like, I can't find shirts that fit me on the arms, so I usually roll them up, kind of like I do here, right? Like, they're like, yeah, it's just just your spirit, your attitude just isn't conducive.
Yeah, you're not making a very good Mennonite at the moment. I'm surprised they let you in at all.
Very, very poor Mennonite. But what I had, though, was the ability to bullshit, to gaslight, whatever phrase you want to use. I had learned very, very well how to manipulate and control the meetings. They didn't like that much either.
Shame on you. That is not a skill to brag about.
No,
Normally,
it's not.
we try to rise above that tendency in ourselves, but continue on.
Yes, you are correct. But I will make the argument here that there are many, many people in the confines, in the borders of the Holdeman Church, of the Mennonite world, really at large, that use that skill subconsciously. I doubt many of them are conscious about it. I shouldn't. It's possible that many of them are not conscious about it. It's possible that many of them are, but it's a skill that
I actually think it's a survival mechanism.
100%. It is a survival response.
Yep. So you're calling it a skill, but it's at a necessity.
Yes, but absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So you're saying you learned how to survive well, and that I believe.
Yes. And I to a degree, I had to learn that because I had been planning on getting married in the church, of living in the church. Even then, I was still intent on remaining part of the church. Even then.
Well, okay.
And
all fine and good, but it's a little suspicious here because Crooked Creek and what they asked you, you left.
Yes.
And now you went back, and I mean, you wanted to get married in that congregation and raise a family in that congregation?
Not in that congregation. I had no intent of raising a family or getting married in that congregation. I still planned on marrying that girlfriend that I had from Rimbey.
Oh, so that was a Mennonite girl.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yes. I like I was saying, I don't like dropping names.
You don't have to.
Yes, she was a Mennonite girl. She was a member. We both got expelled. She got reaccepted very quickly. And rightfully so. That situation was unfortunate for her. And I carried a lot of guilt over that situation for a long time because, like most other areas of my life, I generally assumed that overall, not to the extent that I had at one point, but still to a large extent, I assumed that the problem was usually me. So if there was a problem that arose in my sphere of influence or contact, that I was probably somehow the problem, the bad influence, so to speak, as I was joking about much earlier. Yeah.
Well, I tend to also wonder if that isn't something that's a learned behavior as well, because I was long gone from the church, and I ran into that in my workplace, that anything that ever went wrong, I thought was my fault. And I mean, turns
Yes.
out finally the manager took me aside and she said, Amanda, there is nothing wrong with you. Stop thinking that you're the one that needs to fix the situation because it is not on you. This other person's got to, learn a thing or two.
Right.
So,
That's something that does not leave overnight. That's something I still find pieces of in my life today, at work, at at home, in my personal relationships, in my work relationships. I still find that coming up. Though now, in my current frame of mind, in my current place, I have the ability to look at it objectively and tell myself, no, that's not your fault. That's maybe not even your responsibility. Although, if I have the power to change an outcome, I still will try my best to utilize that power without the overwhelming amount of shame and guilt that I used to carry, right? So it's that has become a bit. It was a survival mechanism when it came up, much like the gaslighting, much like the bullshit. But like like most things in life, you can find a positive use for it if you change the perspective on it, I guess. And so that's something that I have worked very, very hard on, is to change my perspective in order to change the usefulness or utility of that mechanism. Um, but back to Crooked Creek, they told me I showed up dressed nicely, told me the exact same thing I told them a week before, and I had a feeling. I somehow just knew that they were going to reaccept me. I was like, oh, that's fine, and I told them the same. They sent me out of the room for their little panel, their discussion outside of my earshot. They called me back in. I said, we've conferred, and we've decided that it's time to reaccept you. And it's like, if that's what you decide to do, that's okay. And it was kind of funny because that was not the response that they were expecting, and they kind of looked a little surprised. And the one minister came back and was like, so like, uh, you don't seem very excited about this. I was like, honestly, like I've explained before, my salvation does not rest on your acceptance or non-acceptance of me. And that was a line I used that I still did not, I still had not internalized that. I knew that logically, but in my heart, in my soul, I really did not believe that entirely, because my drinking was 100% a response to the belief that I was doomed. Like, I was doomed. I knew that there was no way there was no way I could fit into the parameters the church required of me. There was no way I could ever live my life in the church. And so by default, I still accepted on some level that I was just a sinner destined for hell. And so my drinking, my smoking, everything I was doing, I tended to not really care whether I lived or died, because it didn't much matter. I just risk taker to an extreme degree. But regardless, they reaccepted me, and I told them, I was like, nothing's going to change if you reaccept me. And nothing did. I continued drinking heavily. I continued smoking. I continued doing everything else that I was doing. And I still continued rarely ever showing up at church. So that would have been in 2010, 2011. And I skated through. Like, they were not willing to really dive into that, it seemed. They would call me in for meetings, and the same platitudes would be said from both sides, and they would just say, well, I think that you need to look at your life, but, carry on. So we carried on. Meanwhile, I was losing my ass financially. The business was not doing well. I had dumped every spare bit of savings and money I had into it. I was spiraling out of control financially. And a friend of mine, a member from Curry Creek, called me up one day. He's like, hey, you want to meet for lunch? Sure, let's meet for lunch. He said, I want to hire you for a project manager position at the fabrication shop I'm working at. Like 20 years old. I'm like, that sounds complicated. What does it entail? He kind of gave me a brief rundown. I was like, I really don't think I have the capability of doing that. He's like, no, you have the capability. It's easy. All right, cool. You think so? Then I think so. I can do this. So I went to work for Western Manufacturing up in Grand Prairie, Alberta, and that was incredible. Gave me a purpose. I could work the obscene hours that I wanted again. I was making decent money. I wasn't completely losing myself financially, and I poured myself into work. Still drinking heavily. I don't think there was a day that went by between the years of 2010 and 2013 that I wasn't drunk pretty much the entire day. I'd get up in the morning, I'd make a coffee cup full of vodka and Red Bull, and that's what I'd drink on the way to work, and I'd just keep drinking that all day, and then I would get back to the house and I would drink a case of beer and fall asleep and wake up and rinse and repeat. Yeah, not very healthy. But
did you ever go to AA?
No, never did. Never did. Yeah. It was an interesting point in my life. There was a lot of hopelessness and a lot of just, I knew that I really wasn't where I needed to be and all that fun stuff. So, carried on. One day the minister told me, he's like, Justin, he said, I think you might need to quit Western Manufacturing if that's coming between you and God. Yeah, sure. Whatever you want to say. And it was about a year and a half into that job, and the company decided to hire people with degrees for the project manager position. In all fairness, it was it had a lot of responsibility. There was a lot of money I was dealing with. Within the first month of me starting there, I was in charge of well over $10 million worth of builds for the oil field, right? So there was a tremendous amount of money that I was working through, and there was a lot of management and supervisory roles that I was filling that, yeah, in today's world,
How old were you?
I was 20, 21 years old.
Okay.
So, ninth grade education. I had never got my GED. I had never gone to school. I had never had any form of formal education. And in the corporate world, they want people with at least a degree of some sort to fill roles such as that. The company decided to make the transition. They hired a bunch of university graduates that had degrees, and I was sort of kicked to the curb. They gave me a position in the company. It was as sales. Apparently, they thought I could talk well and convince people of things. So they're like, well, all right, you go fill this sales role. Wasn't really what I liked doing. Wasn't really what I wanted to do, but still had a job. Yeah, I could do that. So I spent 6 months, a couple of months, I don't know how long, doing that. Again, the time frames are a little fuzzy. I was still fairly drunk most of the time, drinking heavily. Same guy. It was the winter 2012, 2013. Same guy who had hired me into the project manager position. He was still working at the same company, still the same role. He called me up. He's like, you got your CDL, right? Yeah, got my CDL. Never really used it in a capacity of anything larger than a body job, but I have it. It's like, all right. I just bought a winch truck. I want you, would you be interested in running it for me? Yeah, sure, why not? He's like, I'll pay you well, pay you a percentage of gross. It's like, oh, right. Yeah, no, I can get behind that. Anytime somebody's been willing to pay me a percentage of the value that I provide, that is right down my alley. And so I went onto the winch truck. Still drinking for
That
the
is actually
Emmys.
called pay for performance, and I am a huge fan of it.
Yes, it's an incredible system. I have excelled under those systems very, very well because I have an unlimited
Most
supply of
people do.
energy and an unlimited supply of willingness to put up with whatever it takes to get the job done. And so I went.
Well, it changes you from an employee to more of an ownership position. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And so I started driving the winch truck, and I ran the wheels off that truck. I was working 24, 36, 72 hours straight at times, driving, working. And it was great. Couple of months in, the owner, the guy who had bought the winch truck that I was running it for, he came to me. He's like, hey, are you interested in buying the truck? Absolutely. No questions asked. He leased it to me, lease to own. So now I had a winch truck. This is great. Ran myself into the ground. I think the first month that I got on the winch truck, just for illustration, I went from 240 pounds, I dropped down to 210 pounds. I lost 30 to 40 pounds in a month just because I was too busy. I would just forget to eat for days on end, and I just drove and worked. It was great. I had a girlfriend. Well, that part got complicated in a weird way. When I was still working at the fabrication shop, there was a girl that worked at a different office that we started seeing each other a little bit for a few weeks, and it kind of it was a few weeks, nothing more. But there again, I'm still in my core this insecure Mennonite kid that has never really had validation, and the girls never really paid attention to me in my youth, aside from one off here or there. And so I was just desperate for the attention. And so, yeah, became very invested very quickly. Well, a few weeks in, she's like, "Oh, well, I'm out," you know, because the one thing I wouldn't do was there was a line in the sand I would not cross, and that, like, the whole entire idea of premarital sex, just could not bring myself to cross that. It was a weird line in the sand, I suppose, looking back, but it was my line, and I would not cross that. Well, regardless, for any number of reasons, she decided to go a different direction. Caught me completely off guard because she never told me that. I just assumed that, we were moving forward. I found out through roundabout ways. She said that she had severe concerns with my drinking, which, yeah, no, that's logical. A very logical response. To this day, I have no idea how I skated through that period of time, because there was 6 months in there where it got really bad. I had forgotten to pay my insurance bill on my truck. The insurance got canceled. When I went to reinstate it, they asked for just a bit more than I had available to give. So I just put it off. A few weeks later, I had the money that they needed. I called them back up. The number had gone up again. At that point, I was like, well, I guess I'm just not going to have insurance. And so for probably 6 months, I drove without insurance, pretty much just blitzed the entire time. And I never got pulled over one time in that space of time. I didn't get into any accidents. I had no infractions during that entire 6-month period. And looking back now, again, it's one of those moments that there was a power at work that I did not understand at the time, and still struggle to put into words at this time, because my life would have changed very, very dramatically for the worse if I had been pulled over even one time or had any sort of a infraction or run-in with the law. I had a plan. if there was a police officer that pulled me over, I was just going to hand the keys and start walking, because I knew that I was done. Like there was no hope in hell that I was going to get away without at a very minimum my truck being impounded and probably a DUI and any other host of other issues. Because along with that, I had taken to carrying a handgun in my truck the entire time, because Grand Prairie was getting pretty rough. And so, like, that is just wildly illegal in Canada. Again, I knew, but I didn't really care. Yeah. When I was driving the winch truck, I cut back on the drinking long enough. Well, I would forget to eat for days on end, so I didn't have time to drink. So, I was keeping myself pretty straight when I was actually on the truck at work. But that entire period, just bizarre. After the couple-week fling with that girl came to an end, there was a Mennonite girl. I was still a member through this whole entire period. There was a Mennonite girl that was on the fringe, kind of halfway in, halfway out. And she reached out to me one day. She wanted somebody to talk to. That's fine. I'm willing to talk to anyone. I have no issues talking. And so she started talking. And we developed a fairly good friendship. And I told her at one point, I was like, whatever you do, don't try to make this relationship, because that's not going to work. And I don't know if my saying that opened up a door or what happened, but we kind of ended up in a bit of a relationship of sorts. And she was still a member. I was still a member. She was halfway in, halfway out. I was, for all practical purposes, completely out, but still just in name. And so it was kind of a weird dynamic. And the problem was that I really didn't have any feelings for her. Like, whatever she felt for me was in no way reciprocated. I hope to God she never listens to this, because she'll probably know who I'm talking about. But I could not stand being around her. Everything about her just drove me insane. And so I just worked as much as possible. That carried on through 2013, the entire year of 2013. And in my minimal amounts of time off, the drinking just got worse and worse. By then, I had a fairly good group of friends in Grand Prairie, completely removed from the Mennonite world. They were just people that I had met and become friends with in the city. I was renting a room off of one of them, living in their house, partying every weekend, drinking heavily, and life was fun for the most part. I enjoyed it, but I wasn't overly happy, but I just carried on. An interesting little footnote in that whole entire stretch of 2 years was there was a moment in 2013 where I had a realization that, because yes, there was a lot of vices that I was diving into, and I assumed that I was so far removed from the grace of God, so to speak, that there was no hope for me. And one day I was thinking about that, And I had a realization. I was like, it's interesting because through all of the things that I have done, there's that line in the sand that I have refused to cross. I would not sleep with someone in any context, relationship or non-relationship. It didn't matter. That was, and the question was posed. Like I had to ask myself the question: if I'm so far removed from the grace of God, if I'm so far removed from whatever it is that makes a Christian, where did the power come from to draw that line, hold that line, and refuse to go near it? Well, when put that way, I had to accept that there was still something in my life that was more powerful than whatever stubbornness or willpower I could bring to bear. That was a bit of a game changer for me, because it flipped me from having this belief that I was doomed to realizing that there was life outside the church. There was life outside of the acceptance of that religious structure. That was cool. Cool, that weird word to use. It was powerful, to put it mildly, because it gave me the confidence that I could control my own destiny. It was that flip that changed something, because there were other parts of my life that I had just quit caring about, like my finances, like the insurance on my truck, for instance, even my drinking and heavy smoking. I was probably up to 1.5 to 2 packs a day. And I realized that there was a power that I could access to overcome that. I didn't want to, so I didn't. I chose not to, because it didn't, obviously, I was still fine to that point. Why bother changing it? It came to a head on Christmas Day of 2013. I didn't like family gatherings much, my family being still rather dysfunctional, and it didn't interest me much to spend time with them. So I spent the day at home. All my friends were gone off doing their own family stuff. I had the house to myself. I bought a handle of rum. It was my drink of choice. Spiced Captain Morgan. Loved it. I bought a handle of it. 1 3/4 liters. And I spent the day just drinking that. I drank it all in like 8 to 10 hours. I sat on the floor in front of the TV watching some random TV show and just drinking. I would fall asleep, I'd wake up, I'd keep on drinking. And I did that all day long. Evening came, went to bed, woke up the next morning, and the only thought in my mind was that was really stupid way to spend the day. I'm not going to do that again. And so I quit drinking. It was overnight. And it's not that I quit drinking, because I'll still go have a drink. But the need to constantly use it as medication was gone. The need to use it to constantly numb every emotion just disappeared. Interesting part, I've never gotten hangovers. Never. People always laugh and like, oh, you woke up with a hangover. No, did not wake up with a hangover. I woke up absolutely fine, ready to go, as I always did. Like, it didn't matter how much I drink. It still doesn't matter how much I drink. I don't get hangovers. Never have. Maybe I will if I drink that much in the future, but at this point, it really isn't part of my life to that extent. But anyways, the day after Christmas, 2013. Okay, that was really stupid. So I changed it. Still smoked on occasion, sometimes heavily, depending on how hard I was working, how many hours I needed to stay awake or that. But overall, my life fell into a fairly manageable pattern. I was happy. I wasn't depressed anymore. And life was pretty good. It was in 2014, early in the year in 2014, that everything really flipped on end to a large degree, because I met the woman who I would go on to marry and then get divorced years later. But yeah, that was a unique experience in and of itself. I was bored one night on the truck. I was scrolling through my phone like, who can I call to talk to, because I'm bored out of my mind. Couldn't think of anybody I felt like talking to. So I resorted to social media. Found somebody on there that looked interesting, that I was friends with, that I had no idea who they were. And I started messaging them just out of the blue. Like, it was so bizarre looking back. Just conversation. And it was very slow and long, and I would text in the middle of the day when I was awake and working, or middle of the night, and she would respond 12 hours later when she got up. And that's how it went for a couple of weeks. And then we started talking more, and it progressed to phone calls, so on and so forth. She was from down here in Colorado. She came from a broken home as well. Her parents grew up Mennonite, never joined. Her parents had moved from Mississippi to Colorado here, and shortly after separated and then divorced. We had a lot that we connected on. A lot of trauma bonding, so to speak. Which worked for me at the time. I didn't know much about trauma bonding. I didn't know much about that part of things, but it filled something in me that needed to be filled, or that I wanted to be filled. Not sure how to word that. And we ended up meeting later on that year, in July of that year, 2014. She was down in southern Alberta for a week. I parked the truck, went down to meet her. We hung out for a week, and I knew that this was somebody I was going to have more, that I wanted to get to know better, that I definitely wanted something more than just friends. And so we started dating. But my work schedule being what it wasn't all that conducive to any sort of relationship. And so when I got back home after that week, I immediately sold the truck, or went about selling the truck. I had some friends in town that worked for an oil field service company, that they had a schedule. They had 2 weeks on, 1 week off, and they made really good money. So I reached out to them, asked if there was any possibility they were hiring. Yeah, they were hiring. All right. So I applied, got hired immediately. And sold the truck. And by September, I was working for Calfrac, the company I still work for today. Actually, they've turned out to be a good company. They've taken care of me. Regardless, I started for the schedule. And every week off, I was flying down to Colorado here, spending my week off here in Colorado with her. And going back, working for 2 weeks, flying back down. It went like that. And by early 2015, mid 2015, we knew that, well, we'd gotten engaged. It wasn't quite the Mennonite way of being knowing somebody for, nothing.
So you were trauma bonding.
So trauma bonding, and it wasn't quite the whirlwind of engagement and marriage that is common in the Holdeman circles, but it was probably quicker than many engagements and marriages that happen outside the church, right? It was kind of a meet in the middle sort of situation. But by early 2015, we were engaged, and we
Okay, but
ended up
that's a
getting
year
married.
after you guys started talking. That's not that quick.
Yeah, no, that's also fair. That's a fair point. And
Okay.
so we got married in September of 2015,
Well, that's a good
and that
month.
brought about a entirely new set of challenges because now
Yeah.
I'm still working 2 weeks on, 1 week off, and I had no intention of changing that. I actually had really, really come to enjoy my job tremendously. And so I was pretty dead set on making the relationship, the marriage work on top of holding down that job. But I wasn't entirely set on staying in Canada either. I knew that marrying her definitely opened up a lot of options. And so late 2015, well, actually all the way through 2015, there was a bit of a crash going on in the oil markets. Work was still keeping me very busy, but it was getting a little tenuous. Contracts weren't as plentiful as they had been, and there was layoffs. They were laying off some of the operators that weren't performing very well. Didn't really affect me. And in November of 2015, I was up in Alberta at work, and yeah, stupid mistakes that worked out for the best. I ended up getting pulled over for speeding, for going twice the speed limit. Yeah, I was doing about 120 in a 60 zone, give or take. That's miles per hour. 200 kilometers an hour in a 100 kilometer an hour zone. Not great. And I knew that was going to be the end of my job because they required me to hold a CDL, and I knew that my license was definitely going to get suspended off of this. So the officer that pulled me over, he was actually really understanding, albeit probably a little disgusted that I'd been racing on a public roadway. But he pushed the court date out as far as he could. Good couple of months. So it gave me a couple of months of reprieve. And so I immediately put my plan, I use that term loosely, into action. I finished out my hitch up in Alberta, and I went back down to Colorado in December of 2015. And I knew that I needed to work on my immigration, get my green card, move to the States. So I moved with the clothes on my back and a duffel bag and a duffel bag. I moved to Colorado. I knew that financially I was not doing well again because I had spent pretty much all of my money on traveling to the States to date my now wife. Oh yeah, I've always been a little loose with my money, and so this was no surprise. But I also knew that I could effectively wipe this slate clean. Not something I'm very proud of. Actually, I hesitate to even talk about it because it just is really embarrassing in many ways. But I walked away from everything. My truck, the truck that I owned, all of everything I owned aside from my clothes, I left in Canada. I knew the banks were going to come for it. I knew that I didn't have a hope in hell to pay it back. So I just walked away. And yeah, they repossessed the truck. They didn't like the credit cards that I left racked up. But there again, Canada's banking system operates on a different frequency than the American banking system. It doesn't cross international borders, aside from phone calls. And phone calls were easy because all I had to do was talk to people. And so the debt collectors would call me, and I was like, "Ah, sorry, don't have the money." Well, 2016, I spent just working through immigration, getting my green card, getting my work permit, all that fun stuff. I worked at a ranch down here in Center and made ends meet as best as possible, which turns out wasn't overly difficult once I had no more payments to make. Wasn't worried about paying any of my bills, up in Canada at least. I was like, I'm not going to make that same mistake again. And so I set out on a different course. And it worked very well. Worked at the ranch for 6-8 months. And by that time, I had all of my paperwork. I had my status, my green card. And I went back to driving truck. I hauled logs down here in southern Colorado. That was an adventure all of its own. I figured, man, what's the worst they could throw at me? I drove winch truck in the Alberta oil fields. How bad can it be? Well, turns out that Colorado mountains are a whole lot different than Alberta oil fields. I had a lot of fun though. And it was in January of 17 when I was like, man, I wonder if I could go back to Calfrac, because I know the money's good and the schedule's good. I talked to my wife, and she wasn't overly enthusiastic, but she's like, some extra money would be good. We were living in a fairly rundown house at the time. It was very cheap rent. That was one good thing. Well, actually, it was no rent. All I had to do was take care of some stuff around the property, and I could live there for free. But I really wanted to buy a house. I wanted to actually, carry on. Which reminds me, I skipped. I missed an integral part of all that, or of that entire portion of my life. Through that entire time that I was going to Colorado, working in the oil field, dating this girl, I was still a member. They had never expelled me. I hadn't been to church in months. They would reach out to me, and every now and again I would agree. I'd go have a visit with them. And the problem was that it felt to me at the time like they could not expel me. They struggled to know how to expel me because I was a closed book. I wasn't giving them any more information than exactly the question they asked, exactly how they asked it. And so unless they asked a very specific question, I was not going to answer it.
Okay, but they had to have known you were married.
No, so this is when I was still engaged. So this was
okay.
just
okay.
Yeah, so this was during the time when I was engaged.
So you hadn't walked away from all of your financial obligations yet either, because I was going to say that's another one.
That is correct. That was still prior. This was like early to mid 2015 when I was still early to mid 2015, still carrying over from 2014. Right, they would have visits with me and so on and so forth. And I would not lie. That was another line in the sand. I would not lie, but I got very, very creative on how I answered. Again, the whole full of bullshit thing, right? Like you can spin a story that's technically not a lie, but so completely evades the truth that there is no truth in it, but it's not a lie. And I stuck to my guns on that one. I never lied to them. I just did not tell them what they wanted to hear. And so they just kept on pushing me to the back burner. This was going on 3 years. I hadn't been to church in years. In that time as well, there was one more really, really funny to me and very satisfying to me footnote. Another meeting. Revival times. They wanted to have a meeting. They reached out. I said, sure, that's fine. I will meet with you anytime. I have no issue with that. So they arranged a meeting. Then I got thinking about it. I was like, man, when I was 17, they pulled out the entire cavalry. I don't really want to walk into a situation like that again. So I told the minister that was arranging this, I was like, I would like this person and this person and this person at the meeting. I named off 3 names. And he got a little annoyed. He was kind of, well, the plans have already been made. Like, it's revival time. The people that are going to be there have already been arranged. I was like, great, then change it. He's like, well, okay, I'll see what I can do. He messaged me back and said, yeah, okay, changes have been made. And then I got thinking about it, and I was like, man, that really does come across as very cagey. Not really a look I like. So I messaged him back, and I was like, look, bring who you want. I don't care. Be my guest. Okay. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I walk in to the meeting room at church, and it was the entire cavalry again. 9 to 10 ministers and deacons sitting around a table, all staring at me. Sat down, and they started just asking questions. I don't know what questions, just generic. And I was answering as best I could. And one of them pipes up and he's like, it seems like I just get the feeling that you're not being fully honest with us. And something snapped. Something snapped inside of me. Something broke. And it kind of annoyed me. And I came back and I was like, look, you can say what you want. I'm being as honest as I can. But the truth of the matter is there's 9 of you, there's 1 of me. At any given time, 8 of you think I'm probably lying to you because human psychology dictates that if I'm not making eye contact with you, you think you're lying. Or you think I'm lying. Interesting. That's really interesting. Yeah, I can see how you might feel that way. Okay. Carry on. More generic connect questions. And then a different minister comes up and he's kind of laughing and he's referencing my previous comment about just the fact that there's 9 of you, 1 of me, and I wasn't really holding anything back at that point. He's like, I get the feeling that you don't trust us, really. I was like, trust. Interesting that you would bring up trust, because there was a point in my life where I trusted you completely. I was 17 years old, and I trusted that you had my best interest in mind. I trusted in the church. I trusted in everything you stood for, believed in, and preached. And I was 17, and I walked into a meeting exactly like this. And you asked me whether I masturbated with my friends, whether I was going to strip clubs, whether I was having sex with animals. You think I don't trust you? Of course I don't trust you. It was the perfect ending, or it felt like the perfect ending. It sounds terrible. I know how it sounds to anybody that would ever listen to this. Vindictive, and like I hold grudges. And like I couldn't wait to just lay it on them for my perceived wrongdoing those years ago. But it did solve the issue of any of the home staff saying another word the entire meeting. The man who had asked many of those questions, he literally, like, I watched him sink down in his chair. Like his head dropped a couple of inches, his shoulders came up, and he sat there without saying another word the entire time, which I really, really appreciated because I really didn't want to talk to the man. And then the visiting staff and I had a great conversation. We talked for probably an hour, and at the end of the hour, they're like, man, the church needs more people like you. This is great. We need more open honesty like what you have. It's like, laugh. I was like, yeah, good luck with that. But thanks. And so that was just a footnote that happened in those years. And I don't know what year or what time frame. It was just an interesting ending, because it was in that moment that I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was gone. I was done. It was just a matter of them to expel me at that point. Like, I was checked out completely of the Holdeman Church, and there was nothing that could bring me back.
Okay, so how did you leave though? Because you still hadn't left yet, and now they think that the church needs to have more honest people.
So how did I leave? Like I was saying, it was up to them. I never told them. I never told them in so many words at that point. But I wasn't attending church even irregularly at that point. Like, I had showed up for that meeting because they requested that meeting, and that was the only reason I had showed up for that meeting. Also because, quite honestly, I really, really enjoyed arguing with the ministers. I loved everything about that dynamic because I had, like I was saying, I had learned how to so completely control and manipulate the situation that they had no idea how to deal with it. They would come at it from one angle and I would throw it right back at them. They'd come from a different angle, I'd throw it right back at them. It got to the point where the one minister straight up told me, he's like, I will not talk to you. I will not talk to you anymore. You can text and I might respond, but I will not answer your phone calls, and I will not sit down and talk with you. Okay. Interesting way to show, leadership and love, but okay, cool. So I had left. I had left for all practical purposes. They just didn't know how to expel me because I wouldn't give them any information. So it was probably a month or two before I was before I got married. One of the ministers called me up, not the one that wouldn't talk to me. He still wouldn't talk to me. I don't think I've had a conversation with him since. But he called me, and he's like, I think the time has come that we're going to have to expel you. I was like, great. That's cool. You do what you have to. You need to. And I told him, I was like, you need to. Do it then. He's like, well, it's just, he wouldn't come out and say that they did not have a reason that they could expel me for, but he told me that they needed to expel me because I had left. And so I don't know when I got expelled. That was all done well outside of my sphere of caring anymore. I don't even think that I got a phone call from any of the staff after I was expelled. I just accepted that I was expelled at some point. I think one of my friends from the congregation texted me and told me a couple of days after, and was like, hey, just so you know, you're expelled. I was like, yeah, I kind of figured. Cool. Carried on. I did make the joke a lot to my wife, my fiance at the time, that, she came dangerously close to marrying a Mennonite, and that she maybe needed to consider some of her life choices if, she was into marrying Mennonites, but stupid jokes. Anyhow, moved down to Colorado, and then went through that entire process of abandoning all of my responsibilities and every single one of my commitments that I'd ever made in Canada, and restarted my life from scratch down here. Went back to Calfrac in 2017, early 2017. And then, honestly, life just pretty well smoothed out fairly well for a number of years after that. Being married had brought about an entirely different set of challenges that were very, very unique. I got to know the center congregation fairly well. I made a lot of friends in the center congregation, friends that I still have to this day. Like, it always intrigued me so much because there was never a point where they held the avoidance on me down here. Like, I could go anywheres and be with anyone, and they would treat me like an actual human being. They would shake my hand. They would eat at the same table as I would. And they treated me with dignity and respect, which was great. I appreciated that. But yeah, Worked at Calfrac, 2 weeks on, 1 week off. Did that for a good couple of years. And then my wife told me one day, she's like, I can't do this anymore. You're gone too much. And it's killing me. Well, copy that. Because if there was one thing I did care about more than money and work, was my relationship, my marriage. And so I quit Calfrac, came home, and the only skill set I really had was oil field at the time. So I found a job on a drilling rig here in Colorado, closer to home, allegedly a better schedule. Yeah, that turned out to be a lie. And I hated the drilling rigs. Hated it with a passion. My life it was miserable. Didn't last there very long, maybe 6 months at the most. And life just kind of turned unique. Weird, I don't know. I went from there. I took a consulting position in the oil field for a couple of months. 6 months into that, I got fired, actually, for a mistake that I'd made. First time in my life I'd ever been fired from a job. That one hit home. I didn't like that much, but it did bring me home full time. That was in 2019 when that all went down. I went back to what I was doing when in my teenage years. I would do this and that for a few months here and there and try to make things work as well as possible. We bought a house by that point. I had a lot of financial obligations here in the States. And it was getting rough financially again. Unfortunately, apparently who I am as a person is not good with money. I'll just say that. But I found myself being gone more and more. Again, I was driving truck and just trying to make ends meet seemed to take me away from home longer and longer. And it finally came to a head in 2021. And she told me she couldn't deal with it anymore. She couldn't take it and that she was leaving. Another massive upheaval. Yeah. There's so many parts of that part of my life that are, well, still very, very raw. Still very painful in many ways, but the one underlying theme that I have held to, and this, I can follow this back all the way through 2013 when I finally got a handle on my drinking and all of that, was I knew that when life throws you situations that cause pain, it's trying to teach you something. It's trying to teach you a lesson of some sort. And it's my responsibility to figure out what that lesson is. And so that was the mindset that I attempted to hold on to during the divorce and the separation and the divorce. And it was incredible. There were aspects of myself that I had never before realized existed or even thought of. Trauma from my childhood that was still so deeply entrenched in who I was and how I treated the people around me and the world around me that were negatively impacting the people around me and my relationships. It was during that separation and divorce, well, back up a little bit. Colorado legalized weed years ago. I forget the exact year they legalized weed. I had never had any interest in drugs of any kind because before working at Calfrac, in the oil field, I was still enough of a Mennonite at heart that it had no pull on me. It had no attraction aside from the alcohol. That was legal, and that was as far as I would go. When I went to work at Calfrac and did fully separate myself, just leave the church completely, I was under the constant threat of drug tests, and so there was no foreseeable benefit that I could see, at least. That was really weird way to see that, to word that. There was no benefit that I could see in consuming any form of drug, because it could very, very realistically impact my job. I could lose my job, and I wasn't willing for that. And so when guys would offer me cocaine at work, I was like, no, not interested. Weed, I had no interest in whatsoever. Fast forward to 2019, I got fired from my consulting job. I left the oil field completely. I had no ties. It's like, well, for the first time in my life, I'm not under risk of drug testing, of losing my job for a failed drug test. And so I smoked some weed. That was a very unique experience. It affects me oddly. It also taught me something about myself, though, because it made me realize that there was a part of my subconscious mind that needed to control every aspect of who I was, the mask that I wore, the mask that I'd created. And it was funny because my wife had smoked weed up to that point a lot. So she was fairly familiar with it. So I told her, I was like, all right, let's go smoke some weed. Sure. I'll let you buy whatever you want to buy, and I'll just have some of it. Well, I had been smoking heavily. So like my only experience with smoking anything was tobacco, and I was smoking a pack to 2 packs a day when I was living up in Alberta. And so she hands me a lit joint, and I'm dragging on this thing like a cigarette for like 10 minutes. I'm like, I'm not feeling anything. And I turned to her and I'm like, I think it's defective. She's like, no, just give it a minute. Yeah, no, it was not defective. I completely lost touch with reality. I had no idea who I was, where I was, what I was doing, anything like that. It was a bizarre experience. So that was unique. But then I started convulsing, like not convulsing, not like a seizure, but I just sit there and just jerk nonstop. And it went on for hours. It felt like there was a rubber band around my head and somebody would pull it back and let it loose. And my head would just jerk. And I'm sitting there and I had enough conscious thought, like I could still think clearly. And I'm sitting there observing this from almost a third person point of view. And it's like, this is really interesting because everything in your subconscious right now is fighting losing control to such a degree that you can't handle it. Like it's coming out in the weirdest way. And I sat there and just jerked spasmodically for hours. Freaked my wife out. She was almost ready to call the hospital. She ended up calling a friend of hers. She's like, I don't know what to do. Like, this is weird and a little scary. And he starts dying laughing. He's like, he's fine. Just give him water and get him someplace comfortable. He'll be fine. And I was. But that opened up a doorway because, okay, I've tried weed. That was interesting. And so I was like, well, what else is there? And I kind of settled on psychedelics. I was listening to some podcasts at the time that were talking about psychedelics, mushrooms, LSD, mostly mushrooms and LSD, actually, and talking about the benefits that could be derived from that if used in a very specific way.
Would you mind?
Yeah.
Would you mind just naming the podcast?
Yes. So there's 2 of them actually. It's the Lifestylist. So one of them was. Give me a second. I'm gonna have to look it up real quick because it's been it's been a few years now since I've actually listened to any of them, but Luke Story is the one. Luke Story is his name, and he runs the Lifestylist podcast. It's on Spotify. There's a lot of episodes, and they're incredible. He has some incredible material and interviews some incredible people. That opened up an entire different world for me, going down that rabbit trail. And then the name, Aubrey Marcus. You familiar with the name? He runs the Aubrey Marcus podcast. And yeah, it's funny because I just pulled it up on my phone, and the last one I listened to was was August 17th of 2021, and it was about MDMA. So through these guys, I was kind of diving into the world of psychedelics. I was finding any book I could find to read on the subject, and it intrigued me tremendously. But I really didn't know where to go to get any of this, and so I wasn't sure how to proceed. Well, as it so happened, one of my friends that I knew off the drilling rig, I happened to be talking to him one day and mentioned some of this, and he just starts laughing. He's like, "Oh, well, I can hook you up if you want." I was like, "All right, deal." So he gave me what I can only describe as a lifetime supply of LSD. Lifetime if I took it all at once, or if I just used the way it was, like microdosed or even regular dose, it was an inordinate amount of LSD. And I was a little concerned about just diving headfirst into it because it was a very different world. And so I was microdosing with LSD through late 2020, early 2021. And it was incredible. The results were incredible. Microdosing, it almost seemed to be more of an antidepressant than anything else. Along with the physiological responses, like it felt like my eyesight just became so clear. Like I could take a microdose of LSD and right out the gate, the initial effect was every sensory perception became so much sharper and clearer and pleasurable. Like if something smelled good, normally, man, it smelled amazing. If something looked good, it looked amazing. If something sounded good, it sounded amazing. Like music and food and art just took on an entirely new meaning just with microdosing. And so that was really cool. And I played around with that some for quite a few months. And then moving into the separation and divorce, I was sitting at home one night by myself, depressed out of my mind because my life was falling apart once again. I couldn't control any aspect of what was happening to me, or so it felt. And it felt like it was happening to me. That's a whole different topic in and of itself. But I was like, you know what would make this night better? I'll take some LSD. So I took a microdose of LSD. And only way I can describe the experience that night is like it was a train ride through hell. And I was not in control of that train. It opened up a world of darkness inside of me that I never knew existed. I couldn't have possibly imagined existed. Every single traumatic experience from my earliest memory up to that point all came out at once. All of the unhealed wounds in my childhood, all of the suppressed anger that I had learned how to bottle up and force into a lockbox when I was 12 years old, it all came out at once. It destroyed me mentally, like destroyed me mentally for the hours that had any effect. The mental pain got to such a level that it completely became a physical pain. I didn't know how I could exist with that amount of pain and not be dead. And quite honestly, I just wanted to die. Like, a few hours in, it got to the point where I decided that I needed to die, that I could not handle this. And so, yeah, I I went and retrieved my handgun from my truck, which, oddly enough, it wasn't loaded. It didn't even have a magazine in it, which struck me as odd because I rarely ever carried a handgun without there being at least a loaded magazine in it. But I knew where the magazine was. I knew where the bullets were. So I went back into the house to retrieve them. And when I walked into the house, my dog was sitting there looking at me. And right from the moment that I had taken the dose and it started to have any effect, my dog was very, very leery of being anywhere near me. She would just go and lay down and just stay away from me. But when I walked into the house, she was sitting there waiting for me, and she just looked at me. And I could not bring myself to pull the trigger with her just sitting there looking at me in whatever tone of voice she had. I don't know how to explain that. And so it was back to just on the floor screaming for hours because I could not handle it. Could not handle the pain, the mental pain, the darkness, the physical pain, you name it. It felt like a lifetime, that entire episode. And it was a microdose by any standard. I do not know why it had such an effect on me. But it finally started to wear off in the early hours of the morning. And it felt like I could breathe again, finally. It's like, okay, wow, that was unexpected. But I also realized that there was a tremendous amount of pain and trauma that I needed desperately to heal. And if I did not find a way to heal that, it was only a matter of time before I was going to pull the trigger, so to speak. So that gave me a lot to think about. And I thought about it for a week or two and kind of just carried on. And life was not overly good during those weeks because I still was in no way accepting of the fact that the separation and divorce was happening. And it was a couple of weeks later, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to try that again. So I took another microdose of LSD. Exact same results. Another train ride through hell. And even more trauma, darkness, even more memories of events that had happened in my childhood and teenage years that I had completely suppressed and forgotten about. They all came out at once. It was horrific. The physical pain, the mental pain, it was all there. I hesitate to even talk about all of this stuff because there are so many parts. They're like this part of my life. There is so few people that know about it. And I don't know why I am so hesitant to even let that part of my life be known to anyone. But it's part of the story, I guess, or part of it. But that night, that second round, I had a revolver. And I'd sit there and I'd spin a chamber. I had one bullet in it. I'd spin a chamber. And I'd ask myself the question, is it time? And every time there was a voice that'd come back and say, no, it's not. Okay. So I'd put it down. And I would carry on dealing with the pain, dealing with the darkness. At one point, I remember looking in a mirror and I didn't even recognize myself. Like, I sat there for 5 minutes asking myself over and over again, who the fuck are you even? I'd go back, pick up the revolver, spin the chamber. As a time. No, it's not. Put it back down. And I did that for 12 hours. And meanwhile, just the memories and the trauma kept on coming. More and more, thicker and thicker. But through it, I was conscious the entire time. Like, when people think drugs, they think you're out of your mind. You don't have a conscious thought in your body or in your head. There was never a point in any of these experiences where I was not fully, at least to the best of my understanding and my own self-evaluation, that I was not conscious. I was not cognizant of what I was doing and where I was, or the thoughts that I was thinking. And so through all of this, as I'm seeing these memories, as I'm reliving these memories from my childhood and teenage years, there was this thought that in the back of my mind that kept on telling me that this didn't have to be who I was. This was behind me, and all I had to do was essentially find a way to heal those wounds. Yes, the healing process was going to be extremely painful, because just like if you have a cut on your hand or your arm, you can have a lot of dirt and debris and terrible infection inside that wound, but the outside of that wound will still heal up. And you're gonna deal with the effects of it. You're gonna deal with an infection that affects your entire arm, that affects your entire body. And what that voice kept on telling me was that all that this was doing was essentially reopening that wound and cleaning it out, letting that darkness finally escape, leave, so it would not continue to destroy my life from the inside out. And I suppose it was that thought that kept me grounded enough that I was able to make it through it. Because finally, 8 to 12 hours, I don't know how many hours that entire episode went on. It felt like a lifetime again. But when I finally came down, when it finally wore off, I was drained, like, in every sense of the word. But I finally felt like I could move past, like I could move on without whatever darkness was inside of me constantly trying to destroy me. An interesting side effect of both of those LSD trips, for lack of a better term, was that it took me months after before I could conjure up even the slightest amount of anger over anything. Like, it felt like there wasn't an ounce of anger left inside of me to project onto anything. Which also made me realize that all those years ago, when I had suppressed and completely bottled up all of my anger issues from my childhood, it had come out it had ended up coming out in many different ways. They weren't violent. I wasn't hitting people with hockey sticks, but it was still destructive behavior. Whether you want to call the drinking and the smoking destructive behavior like that, like there were so many pieces of my life that were side effects of repressed anger, and those 2 trips wiped that out completely. I had no interest, not even an interest, but I had no ability to get angry or even mildly upset over anything. Probably almost 6 months. It carried me through the separation, through the divorce. I don't know. I did find a sense of equilibrium again afterwards. That felt a whole lot more healthy, harmonious, but it was just a really unique period of my life. Still dealt with depression. There was a lot of depression, but for the most part, there was no suicidal ideologies. There was no tendencies. It was just, I can make it through this. I can, like, there's so much in this that I can learn and grow from. It was during that same time period that I started going down the pathway I don't know, just following rabbit trails on spirituality, and as Cam told Amanda, the aliens and the extra paranormal and all of that. Like, it seemed like that part of me was just like, I was very, very interested in so much of that stuff versus whatever I had been pursuing prior to that. Yeah. I don't know. It was a wild couple of years through there, but life goes on. You need to find a way to continue to exist, continue to move forward in whatever capacity you find yourself. And so I ended up going back to the oil field in 2022. Yeah, that's pretty much brings me up to now. It's just, life's been pretty smooth for the most part since that point. It seemed like that period between 2021 and 2022 was just a massive cleansing / catalyst for me. Yeah.
That's beautiful. It sounds like that. Those 2 trips on LSD were, yeah, what a lot of people experience when they do like a psychedelic journey for spiritual reasons. So I'm very surprised that you, after your first experience, that you even had the courage to try again.
Likewise.
That's
And
amazing.
after that second round, I swore off it. I was like, I never again. And I have stuck to my guns on that one. I've 2 times was enough. I say never. I say never again. It's hard to say what life will bring. Life is unique and brings many different curveballs. And it's possible that there may be a point in my future where it's like, okay, it's time to pick it up again. But right now is not that time.
And you said that during that time you also felt like life was happening to you. But, did you ever stop to change your perspective to for you?
Yes. So, like I was saying, an entirely different conversation altogether. And I'm really happy you brought that up, because there was that realization. There came a point where in that entire journey of spiritual exploration that I realized that I had been viewing life as happening to me. It was happening at the hand of some unseen, unknown power that was forcing me into these situations. And it was in that same moment that I realized that no, in fact, life was happening for me. It was happening for me because of the lessons that I needed to learn, the things that I needed to grow into, the person that I needed to become. You know, like we talked about earlier, there was a reason I'm here. The amount of times that I should have died throughout my life are more than I can count. The amount of times that I have borderline actively tried to end my own life and it got derailed because of circumstances happening in that moment are numerous. And through that, it made me realize that I was here for a purpose, although I did not know what my purpose was, and I still don't. I say I don't know what my purpose is. I think a better way to put that is I'm not overly concerned what my purpose is, because my purpose is the here and now. My purpose is the present moment. Wherever I find myself, in whatever circumstances I find myself, that experience, that moment is happening for a purpose, for me, that even if I don't see it now, it will become clear at some point. And so it taught me to live in the moment to a large degree. I'm not overly concerned about what happened yesterday. I'm not overly concerned about what's going to happen tomorrow. It doesn't mean I'm just an idiot and live life on the edge, but it does kind of come out that way to a degree. Like, there's a lot of risks that I take in my job on a day-to-day basis that I just don't really concern myself with, because if it's my time to go, there's nothing that's going to stop me. And if it's not my time to go, there's nothing that can take me. And it's been rather unique, because it's put me in a position of actually being able to empathize and relate on a much deeper level with some of my coworkers and friends and family, more than I have ever been able to, because I don't need to concern myself with what they did. I don't need to concern myself with what they did to me yesterday. I don't need to, yesterday is yesterday. Yes, you may feel some repercussions of actions taken yesterday that follow into today, but today is a new day. The moment is a new moment, and it's a clean slate. You can do with it what you will. You can choose to look at it how you want to look at it. I feel like I'm kind of rambling on that one, because I don't know how to explain it, but I think that I hope you understand what I'm trying to explain.
A lot of people say it's like a near-death experience where everything else just kind of falls away, and you see what actually is important in life versus what isn't, and you are able to let a lot of that fall away.
Absolutely. And an interesting, one of the realizations that I came to through all of that was that love and compassion were the only things that genuinely mattered at the end of the day. It does not matter how much money I make, what kind of vehicle I drive, any of that. The only thing that matters is if I'm able to approach each moment and individual I meet with love and compassion. It was interesting, actually. Yeah. So in that period of time, the same period of time, I was asking myself the question repeatedly, what is my purpose? what am I here for? And it was, the answer was interesting, because I was out in eastern Colorado one night. It was on a weekend. I had again stayed up. Well, I pushed myself way too hard, driven far too long, worked way too many hours, and I was extremely exhausted. And so I pulled the truck over onto the side of the road to a pullout, because I was going to catch just a bit of sleep, because I was pretty well beat. And I remember pulling the truck over, putting it into park, and the next thing I remembered was it felt like I was sitting in an office chair and it was spinning rapidly. I'm just sitting there spinning, like lights. All I see is just this blur of lights around me. Like, this is annoying. I was like, and the first thought in my head was like, why did I smoke this much weed and get this high when I know that I have to drive still? That you're an idiot. And then the next thought was like, well, there's nothing I can do about it now, so I guess I'm just going to sit it out, and I won't drive until I can see clearly again, because right now I most certainly cannot see clearly. And so I literally just sat back and relaxed and just watched these lights go spinning around me. And they slowly slowed down. And when they finally stopped, all I can say is, like, I was standing in a cave. This is a weird story. Forgive me. If you want to cut this out, you can. This is bizarre. And I'm standing in a cave. And I look around, man, like, this is wild. I don't know where I'm at. No idea where I'm at. And I'm looking at this cave that I'm standing in, and there's no entrance, there's no exit, there is just a cave, and at the end of it, there is a flat wall. It looked like it had been carved perfectly flat. And in this wall, there was this, it took up a good portion of the wall, a pattern of sorts. It appeared to be engraved into the stone, and it glowed, just bright, like orangish white. It was just this glow, like it looked like it was backlit, and it was just this geometric pattern all the way in a circle. And in the middle there was words, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, I cannot read these words. What is this? What is this? And I am sitting there looking at it, and I literally told myself, like, I was like, just focus. And it was like, I told myself to focus, and immediately these words just came into sharp relief. Like, I could make them out very clearly. And it was just two words: love, compassion. And it was like somebody had hit a bell, and it was like, you've been asking for your purpose. Here it is. Love and compassion. That is your only purpose. That is the purpose of your existence. And it was just this moment of like, oh my God, this is wild. And then snap, and I'm back in my truck. I had literally just collapsed over the center console, fallen asleep right there as soon as I put it in park. And I'm sitting there in my truck, and I'm like, okay, that was weird. And even there, like, even when I came back into the truck, like, I woke up, I call it sleep paralysis. I couldn't move my body. Like, there was nothing. I couldn't move. Like, I was sitting there looking at my arm, holding my phone, and I was trying to move it. I couldn't move it. I could feel my arm moving. Like, it felt like I was sitting there flapping my arms like a bird, because I was like, this is bizarre. I'm just trying to move my arm. Couldn't move it. And that lasted for probably another 15 to 30 seconds. And I'm just sitting there. And then, again, clicked. And I was back in control. Sleep paralysis gone. Bizarre night. Life-changing. I had my answer. And so, yeah.
Okay, absolutely. That's an interesting experience.
Bizarre. I don't know what to make of it. Again, I tell very, very few people this because I don't know what to make of it. If somebody came up to me and told me that, I'd look at them and like they were an idiot and probably spun out on drugs. I was sober, 100%. I hadn't had a drink. There was nothing in my system. There was no drugs. There was nothing aside from caffeine and sleep deprivation. So that was my purpose. I decided that was my purpose, at least.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I've enjoyed it. Do you have any last words you'd like to say? Any advice or any lessons that you've learned along the way? I really like, that, love and compassion is, what we're here for.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything more that I could add.
Okay.
I just hope my life just kind of smooths out and continues going smooth because, dear God, I've had enough weird experiences for one lifetime, I think. Possibly even two, I don't know. But
They make us who we are.
indeed
And what
they do.
fun would it be if you didn't have any more?
You got a good point there. You got a good point. So
This boring old life is what you would live.
well, I really appreciate y'all listening, and yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on. We really appreciate you being vulnerable and opening up.
Thank you for listening. It is an honor to connect with our guests, and we wish the best for them as well as our listeners. Remember to like and subscribe for more episodes. Our People can be found on all major podcast platforms as well as YouTube. If you are interested in sharing your story, please contact us at ourpeoplepodcastteam@gmail.com. Thank you.